And I subsequently did very well by placing a lot of bets that were all derived from my understanding of the financial markets and the monetary system in gold. And while most people were losing their homes and losing their wealth, I thrived, and I was protected by some of these investments. The most biggest one was gold.
The Todd Shapiro Show, Canada Laughs, SiriusXM 168.
Dude, it's funny. We got this big brain on the program today. So what did I do? I wore a blazer, and yet you're not even in the studio. What a waste that was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's not your fault. Are you wearing a blazer right now?
I'm wearing pajamas. It's 10:30 p.m. where I am, and I've been going to sleep early lately.
Okay, whereabouts are you?
I'm in the UK.
One of the founder, CEO of Monnaie 24-karat gold investment jewelry, MENE.com. We've talked about it in great deals of length here on the program for the past month, and I'm fascinated by the business. What's going on in the UK for you?
I've actually just been here visiting for some meetings. I'm here for a few days, and then I keep on with my travels.
Roy, you've it's interesting. If you go on your Wikipedia page, you've done so much, and I won't go through all that now. And I think hopefully over time we'll develop this nice on-air relationship here, and obviously hopefully one off-air. But I think today is just a good intro. Why don't we talk about Monnaie? Because when I first met you and you described this business, and I saw this beautiful torque gold bracelet you were wearing, and you showed me, just how true gold bends and all this stuff. I was really blown away by what your vision was, and now how this vision's come to fruition. As I texted you earlier, how did all this come about for you?
Yeah, it's been pretty unpredictable how I find myself now running a jewelry business. But it really all started with my interest and curiosity in financial markets when I was very young. I've been investing in the stock market for 20 years now. And in that investment process, I learned a lot about being a contrarian, which means doing the opposite of what most people find to be conventional wisdom in markets. And one of the things that led me to do was consider whether in 2006 and 2007 the real estate market in the United States was in a bubble or not. And just actually thinking about that as a possibility was quite rare back then. I was very young. I just started this hedge fund, and I was asking those questions. And the more I asked those questions, the more people that were wiser than me basically said, look, if you're so concerned about a housing bubble, then what you really need to do is own gold. And I couldn't at first understand why the two were connected. And I think it took me probably 8 or 9 months just to really peel the onion and peel all the layers of why gold was even valuable to begin with. In fact, I was taught by a lot of people around me that gold had no intrinsic value. And that does seem to be the conventional wisdom these days in the financial community, that gold and everything in life has subjective value. It just has value because we decide to ascribe value to it. And because I'm quite curious about things and I get down to the bottom of them when I am, I started learning a lot about the history of gold and the history of money. And that led me to a really pretty big revelation, which was that for most of human history, when we are free, we decide that money should be gold or silver. But those were usually the two elements that we would choose to use as money. And that allowed me to learn a lot about the changes to our financial system and our monetary system and how we decide what is money today and who decides it, how that money is created and distributed into existence. And lots of quite boring rabbit holes, I guess, for your audience. But where it placed me was in a unique position on the eve of the financial crisis to not only predict what would happen, but capitalize on what would happen. And I subsequently did very well by placing a lot of bets that were all derived from my understanding of the financial markets and the monetary system in gold. And while most people were losing their homes and losing their wealth, I thrived. And I was protected by some of these investments. The most biggest one was gold. And so as we came through the financial crisis, and the way I saw the politicians and the financial experts, quote unquote, deal with the financial crisis, I realized that what people really needed, the average person, was a place to just protect their savings. You know, this whole idea, they're always trying to put us on this pinwheel where we're chasing this carrot, trying to make more money. But over your lifetime, you know, if you could just have a safe place to save your money and maintain what's known as your purchasing power, which just means that when you put away $50 this month, you want to know that when you go and get that $50 in 10 years, you can buy the same amount of goods and services as you did at the time that you saved it. So the same amount of movie tickets, the same amount of health care, the same amount of, you know, electricity.
It goes up as inflation goes up, so to speak.
Yeah, and inflation is a complex word because most people don't understand what it means. But it just means that, you know, if you hold a dollar bill in your hand, the longer you hold it, the more it disappears. And it disappears because the government is able to finance its operation. The government's like a company, and it's able to finance its operation by printing more. So if there are $100 bills in circulation in, say, year one, and you hold one, by year 5 there will be 500, and yet you still hold one. So your one component of that pie has decreased significantly, which means the things that can survive time increase exponentially. Things like real estate, things that are tangible. But again, if you study these things quite deeply, as I have, you find that most things lose value over time, or maintain their value. It's just the effect of inflation that's masking that and causing what appears to be nominal gains, mathematical gains. So, you know, back to gold, I thought, you know, if you could just provide people with a place to preserve their savings and avoid these crises, which I felt would continue all over the world, I thought that would be a pretty good idea. And because of my knowledge of gold at that point, and having made investors a lot of money in my prior career, I was able to come up with this idea that was called BitGold. And, you know, it was really the right time for that idea. And it was essentially, think of it like an online bank account, like PayPal, except instead of having a deposit of currency, like dollars or euros or pounds or yen, you owned a weight of precious metal, gold, silver, platinum, palladium, which was stored at a vault physically, and you could still use that weight in the same manner that you used your checking account. You had a MasterCard, which you could spend from that account. You could make instant transfers like Venmo. If you were a merchant, you could accept payments with that account. And so that was BitGold. And coinciding with that, I stopped managing my fund to focus on that full-time. It was a really exciting experience, and we did very well. We took that from basically nothing, an idea in 2015, to about 1.5 million customers today worldwide, and almost $2 billion of client assets under custody, which is basically 35 tons of precious metals stored in 15 vaults, more than most countries. And that's when I realized that, you know, there's real appetite out there for, you know, as my co-founder likes to say, a tool and a narrative. In other words, there's a tool, which is a technology that we've built, but also the education around why people want to be doing this. And, of course, as we were doing that, another technology began to proliferate called Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And so and the genealogy of those technologies have to do with the same things I discussed earlier, the financial crisis and the monetary system. And you know, whoever Satoshi Nakamoto is, you know, is deeply grounded in the same vernacular and concepts and things that I discussed sort of at the beginning of this interview.
So it's not you then, Roy. It's not you.
No, it's definitely not me.
Okay.
Strong belief I know who it is, and we even follow each other on Twitter, but if I told you, I'd have to kill you.
Okay.
So you know, 3 years into the BitGold experience, which is now called GoldMoney, by the way, we made a few acquisitions and we went public, and we ultimately decided that we didn't want to use the word bit because we felt it was misleading, and I was trying to avoid having to spend the first 10 minutes of every conversation explaining to people why I'm not Bitcoin. So I changed the name to GoldMoney. But about 3 years into that experience, actually 2 years, we started to notice two things. The first thing I noticed was that there were jewelry companies, small jewelers, that were opening accounts at GoldMoney in order to procure the bars of metal from us, because we allow people to actually redeem the bars if they want. And I thought that was interesting because it implied that these jewelers couldn't access the physical metal anywhere other than through us, which I found was bizarre. Because I'd always known that most of the gold that's mined every year goes into jewelry. So I just assumed the jewelry industry was quite efficient. And then the second thing that happened to me was I went to India and China for about 3 weeks. And when I got there, I sort of had like a come to Jesus moment when I realized that the jewelry that they were buying was so different from the jewelry that we buy in the West. It was devoid of any gems or diamonds. It was pure gold, 24 carats, and it was jewelry that they sold by weight with a very minimal design premium. So, for example, if you bought something for $500, you only paid $50 for the design, and you still had $450 as a savings, physical savings that you could adorn, that you could wear. And, I would walk into these jewelry markets and stores, and I'd see how, people were selling the jewelry just as often as they were buying it. They were exchanging it. It was really like having a bank account that you're wearing instead of trusting your bank. And, of course, this made sense. Using my finance background, I was able to see why these people were doing it. They lived in countries with corrupt governments, with very oppressive regimes, and with very high inflation. So if we're using sort of the concept we described earlier, where you hold $1 and there's 100, and 5 years later there's 500, well, imagine 1 week later there's 500. That's called hyperinflation. And in countries like India and in countries like Vietnam and Thailand and even China, the inflation rate is much higher. So what these citizens do, because again, they're just trying to preserve their labor, their savings, encapsulated into some sort of a medium that will transcend time, they buy gold jewelry, 24 karat gold jewelry, and so they wear it. So I left that experience recognizing two things: that I hadn't fully comprehended sort of the potential for gold jewelry, which was very enormous. We're talking about a $300 billion a year industry. But the second was I felt compelled to create a business that could disrupt the Western jewelry industry and create a Western brand that was cool and that basically behaved just like a Western jewelry brand, but that had these mission-driven values where we would sell 24-karat jewelry transparently by weight. You could always sell the jewelry back. I came up with the term investment jewelry because the majority of the purchase price isn't going towards design. It's going towards the intrinsic value of the metal. And you can track that value. So I had this idea, and I went back and I did a lot of research into the Western jewelry industry. And what I found was pretty crazy. I found that the margins of the average item in the West, from Tiffany's or Cartier or any of these companies that you know quite well, are close to 90%. In other words, when you buy something for $1,000, $900 is going towards non-intrinsic value of the metal. In other words, you bought something.
Marketing. It's going to marketing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Madison Avenue and parties and things like that. Even though there's nothing wrong with that, right, Todd?
No, I would not at all.
So, I mean, when I discovered the margins in the West, I was perplexed. I thought, well, why are people willingly doing this? Why are people willingly buying something for $1,000, leaving the store, and it's only worth $100? And what I was excited to see was that actually was reversing. The trend was reversing, and it wasn't always that way. For decades, these jewelry brands, I could show you old ads that Tiffany's used to place where they did sell jewelry by weight, and I could show you, old examples where that wasn't the case. But over the last 20 or 30 years, these brands became more like apparel companies, where they're just trying to engage in as many transactions as possible. They're not trying to build a long-term value with their customer, and so they're just trying to sell you. They're just trying to sell the least amount of units, the highest margin. They call that the luxury industry. And for the last few years, there has been this desire on the part of a very small segment of society to adorn themselves with things that tell other people that they're rich or they're cool, call that social currency. But on the margin, these companies actually have been suffering, and they haven't seen great sales growth. So when I look at that as an entrepreneur, I see a ripe opportunity to disrupt. And so what we're doing with MENE, which we launched, is basically craft 24-karat jewelry in the United States. We have a factory in the U.S. We sell it direct to consumer online. We sell it at the daily price of gold or platinum. We make gold and platinum. And you can sell it whenever you want back to us. You can track the value of the jewelry. And every day the price changes. And so between 80 to 90% of what you're paying goes towards the metal value, and the rest goes towards design. And I don't want to skimp on the design part. A co-founder of the company is Diana Picasso, the granddaughter of Pablo Picasso, and we
amazing,
pretty awesome design. So it's a lot of people have been extremely impressed. Whether it's Vogue, which said that we're revolutionizing the gold industry, or the New York Times recently came out with a big cover story about us, feature story. So we've been able to sort of hit two birds with one stone. But the fundamental mission here for me is I feel like it's my job to educate people on the merits of gold, and I really want to restore that historic link that jewelry used to have to savings. When you think about jewelry, I want you to think about saving money, not spending money. And that's what we've achieved here with MENE.
It's all so brilliant, and I've told you that personally. I fall in love with it, and I know a lot of people, listeners, and even my personal network of people, anyone I talk to, are fascinated by it, and fascinated that it's running so efficiently too. This isn't just an idea. This is now something you go to the website and you look at the beautiful charms or necklaces, trending stuff that is already even out of stock. It's so popular. But you mentioned the word earlier about being free. When citizens want to be free, is that something you ever fear one day? Like, is there a practicality more than just that you can sell it back, the true value, you see the value, you can follow your value on MENE? But do you ever see, not to get fear-mongering or dark here or anything, but there's a point where people are actually looking at their beautiful MENE jewelry and going, I might need this one day as a currency? Yeah,
I think that's less likely in the West than it probably is in some of the other countries. And I don't want to... there's a term in the gold space called gold bugs, and they like to wear tinfoil hats and hope that the end of the world is near. I don't think that's going to happen. I'm very much a believer in sort of the millennial inclusive ideology of positivity and cooperation and things like that. The way I look at it is differently. I'd say that if you lived through the financial crisis of 2008, if your viewers are on their computer, they should look up things like the IndyMac bank run of 2008, and you'll see videos on YouTube of Americans in Los Angeles waking up one day being unable to access their bank accounts. Literally, and not a lot of people know about this or talk about it, but for a few days, people couldn't actually access their bank account until the FDIC stepped in and actually had to transfer liquidity to this bank. And in Cyprus, it happened for weeks. In Greece, it happened. In Spain, in Italy. So it's not inconceivable that you may need it under that scenario. We want to hope that won't happen. The thing I think is more likely is if you think of governments like a country, like a company, then the government's revenue is their taxes, the taxes the government collects. And the government's operational expenditures is the fiscal budget. And when a government has a fiscal budget that exceeds its tax revenue, it runs what's known as a deficit. Now, a deficit is mathematically irreconcilable unless you plug that gap. So how do you plug that gap if you're a government? Well, you have this magical thing called the printing press, where you can print money. And so as long as your citizens are willing to use that money and get paid in that money, you can continue printing it in order to make up the difference between your tax revenue and your fiscal budget. Now, if you look at the entire list of companies in the West, they all run fiscal deficits, significant fiscal deficits. We're talking about 10 to 20% of their economy. So what that creates is an ever-growing amount of national debt. And you can track that. Take the United States, it's at $21 trillion today. What ends up happening here is you can almost predict that there's going to be inflation. You can sit back and you can predict. It's harder to predict a crisis because as long as the government can print money, you shouldn't really have a crisis like 2008 again. It shouldn't happen. But as long as the government can print money, I can pretty much sit here and tell you you're going to have structural inflation for the rest of your life. That means the things you need are going to go up in value. And so the way I look at it is our jewelry and gold is a great way to protect your savings from that erosion that's going to come from inflation.
I love it. And the really, interesting part for me after sort of going to the website and learning even more about it, where you have an about page there and you talk about the relative scarcity of the elements, which I think is the perception behind what people have for diamonds or for sapphires. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, Roy?
Yeah, so a few things that I want to talk about beyond sort of the whole mission is when gold is discovered in nature, it's discovered as pure. Now, the word 24 karat just means 100% pure. 22 karat means 92%, 18 means 75, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're getting gold that's 18 carats, it means they took the pure gold, the way it's found in nature, and they mixed it. They alloy it. They add other things to it. So you no longer actually have gold. It's just like eating GMO meat or pasteurized from concentrate orange juice. You don't have the real thing anymore.
It's not organic gold.
Yeah, well, gold is an inert element, so we call it whole, not organic. Yeah.
Okay.
But what's interesting here is that what I just described to you, sort of in the boring chemistry terms, is actually instantly discernible to you as a human if you simply look at pure gold. In other words, when you look at it, you can instantly tell, like, holy shit, that looks totally different from anything else I've seen before. Then when you go and you touch it, you're like, wait a second, that is so dense, which means it's so relatively heavy for the amount of space it occupies. And you pick it up and you're like, whoa, that's so heavy. And so if you actually pick up a little bit of gold and hold it in your hand and you compare it to an 18-karat alloy, the 18-karat starts to look like silver. It doesn't even look like gold anymore. And then you discover this other interesting thing. It never rusts. You could throw it in the water. It never rusts. And it's antimicrobial. It kills bacteria on touch. So it's this magical element, gold. And that's why we ascribe so much value to it. It's one of the only elements that doesn't corrode. So that's why we use it in all the semiconductor chips and things like that. So I think that when people look at nature, and this is sort of a small chemistry class here, there are 92 elements, 92 basic elements that, the Legos of life. Everything is made out of those elements. All but 4 of those elements will basically respond to oxygen and die. And the 4 that don't are called the noble metals, and that's gold, silver, platinum, palladium. Now, gold, out of those 4, is the rarest and the most discernible. Gold and platinum are pretty clear, but the problem with platinum is you can't tell the difference between platinum, silver, and palladium. And gold has other attributes, which I won't get into, which make it better. But so the point is, when you think about a diamond, that's actually called carbon. It's a crystal of carbon. It's not that rare at all in the periodic table. And in fact, it's something that can be created because you can just apply pressure to carbon and you can create a crystal. And that's why we're seeing all these man-made diamonds right now. So diamond was never a store of value historically. There's no evidence of that. With gold, we go back 4,000 or 5,000 years since the beginning of writing, the Code of Hammurabi. In fact, MENE is an Aramaic word that used to denote 500 grams gold. It was the word for money in Aramaic going back to the time of Babylon. But diamonds, all we see is that in the 1970s, this family called the Oppenheimer family that controlled all the diamonds, the Beers, they started putting a lot of money behind marketing. And so they created all these terms. Diamond is forever. Actually, no, I can burn a diamond at 2,000 degrees. It burns. You can literally burn a diamond. It's like a coal. You have to use 2 months' salary to buy a diamond. All this nonsense. And it worked, and there was a lot of prosperity, and there were a lot of people incentivized to tell you that it's valuable. But at the end of the day, from pure physics, chemistry, there's nothing special about a diamond, whereas there's so many things that are special about gold. So, for example, if you were to buy $500 bracelets that we sell today, 20 years ago, it would be worth $2,500 today. And if you were to buy a $500 diamond 20 years ago, it'd probably be worth about $400 or $500, depending on the carriage. But it hasn't gone up at all. The last 8 years, diamond prices have only gone down. So I think this type of education has been missing. I've been uniquely positioned to first learn it myself and now proselytize it, share it with others, which is how I got into this whole thing. But we think there's a very, very big opportunity here because every single person you know buys jewelry. So I advise your listeners to visit MENE.com. We actually have a really great referral program where if they refer people, they can get $50 for every person that buys jewelry. And check it out for yourself.
The other big benefit, because I got a beautiful bracelet for my wife for Mother's Day, is that it's like bicep curls now. It's so heavy. It really is. It's brilliant.
Yeah, it's real. Everything that's real has a real weight to it.
Roy, I find it amazing. And the other part of it, and we only have a few minutes here left, and I do appreciate it. I know it's late for you out in the UK there. And just working with you and talking about a product that I wholeheartedly believe in. And you're right, when everyone buys jewelry, why not buy jewelry where you can track its exact value at any given point and never worry about a shyster being involved, which happens in the jewelry industry, and people need to be aware of that. But I also love it because it's just cool, and I don't want to stereotype guy versus lady here or anything, but tracking things. I'm a big guy who follows the stock market and invests and everything, and just watching that value, go up and things like that. It's a really neat angle on buying a piece of jewelry, but then following it after, where I don't want to pigeonhole men here, you might not really be concerned anymore, but it's kind of neat to follow it after and see, your wife, your girlfriend, your partner just really enjoying that piece. So all around, it's kind of you're involved in it. You're involved in the piece once you own it, dude. It's so great getting to know you. And I joked earlier, but you have this big brain, and I think from time to time, beyond just the gold and Monnaie and everything you're doing, I hope we can pick it up, and learn more and help educate our audience. And Lord knows the Shapiro Show audience needs it.
Thanks a lot, Todd. No, that's great. I'm really glad you like your Monnaie bracelets. And I think people used to look at jewelry the way people today look at property or art or their investment account. You go back 40, 50, 60 years, you talk to your grandmother, your grandparents, they used to share their jewelry with you like they were showing you their stock portfolio. Like, this is an heirloom. This is, an heirloom is something that can transcend time and essentially fold a subjective memory, an abstract memory, into something physical.
And that's a beautiful way to look at it, too. You can share these pieces and leave them in wills because the value you're getting. Now you cause all these other fights, though. Roy Sebag, man, thanks so much. MENE.com, MENE.com. I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Thanks a lot, Todd. Have a nice day.
Cheers.
The Todd Shapiro Show, Canada Laughs, SiriusXM 168.